Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks for taking your time today. This is our first week of our grand experience. As most of you know, we usually all get together, 400 of us, at a great event usually at the Union League Club for our grand tasting at the end of January, beginning of February. Due to this fabulous pandemic, we are not able to do that. So we pivoted quickly to adjust in the fall for a fall tasting, and then we tweaked it a little bit more, and now we have the grand experience now in February. We have our sale pricing that is currently going on and available for everyone. And then we have 8 presentations that we're doing through the month of February. This is the second one. Every Monday of February, we're doing master classes presented by the best people in the field to talk about different subjects. And then every Wednesday of February, we're doing Winery Wednesdays. And we're focusing and reaching out to 4 of the most exciting and new wineries that Louis Glunz Wines has represented. And of those, I will turn the floor right to our guests. We have the Supernatural Wine Company, which we are super excited and extremely thankful to Gregory, the owner. Gregory Collinge is up at 5:30 in the morning in New Zealand to join us, and Anthony is the importer. Anthony Alport is in beautiful Detroit, Michigan, which we'll be visiting here briefly, and then Mr. Nicholas Pappas, an old Glunz employee back in his youth, is here as well. So it's fantastic to have him. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing screen here. And the first thing we are going to do is to run through, and I will cue this up. I had forgotten to set this on. That'll make it a lot easier, and share that screen. All right, everybody able to see that?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. So I've, of course, started where we're going to end up. I forgot to cue that up as I was tweaking things. But here we are in beautiful planet Earth. And we're going to get started here in beautiful Chicago, Illinois, right on beautiful Lake Michigan. It is a beautiful sunny day, as you can see there. And then as promised, I'd like to harass my good friend Anthony about representing such beautiful wines from New Zealand, from all the way in Detroit, Michigan. So then from here, we are going to go to the land of Gregory Collinge. Gregory is all the way basically on the other side of the world in beautiful New Zealand, within the Hawke's Bay, which is up here on the Northern Island. And you can see exactly where Supernatural is. Supernatural Wine Company is looking beautifully at the ocean there. And without further ado, I will welcome our friend Gregory. Gregory, how are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. a little jaded and a little croaky at this time of the morning, but waking up fast.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, very welcome. Now, are you going to, you're sharing the presentation, is that correct?
You got it. I will go ahead and cue that up right here.
Yeah, thank you for the location map there. Is that?
All right. Can everybody see that the presentation?
I can. Yep. Is that one of Anthony's slides, or is that?
That looks like that is the PDF that I was sent to this morning. I think it's got 12 slides. Is this the correct one, Anthony?
Joe, it looks like you have our invitation up, not the presentation.
Yeah, there should be a devoted Supernatural Wine Co. one sent.
All right, give me 1 second. And on my screen, I had that up. We had same challenge here yesterday. So let me just go ahead and clear that invitation out. And we'll pop this up, and then see if this works. As far as sharing, sorry about the slight technical challenge. Let me see if This sharing goes correctly. All right, how does that look?
That looks good. Yeah,
right.
thank you. Yeah, so I mean, just very quickly, as you said, we are on the east coast of the North Island of New Zealand, and the region is called Hawke's Bay. Hawke's Bay, I mean, very briefly, is the second largest wine growing area in New Zealand. Marlborough at the top of the South Island is far and away the biggest wine growing region. Obviously, that's where New Zealand has become famous with Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. I think Hawke's Bay accounts for about 10 to 15% of New Zealand's wine production. And as you showed on your map, we are out by the coast, which makes us a little bit different in a Hawke's Bay context, because most of the Hawke's Bay wineries are inland, on gravels, around historic riverbeds, whereas we're, like I say, a little bit different. We're coastal. We have a little bit of elevation. We have sea breezes, and we're on a very hard clay pan with a sort of sandy loam layer on top of that, and then volcanic topsoil. So for in the Hawke's Bay context, Hawke's Bay, I guess, is sort of quite famous for its hot reds and hot whites. So your sort of Bordeaux varieties and Chardonnay and Syrah and so on. Our vineyard is much more suited to the aromatics that we're producing, which is Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Gris on our site. And our soil is very lime rich, very calcareous. So we get some quite interesting, and our vines are now approaching 15, 16 years old, and the roots have now hit that clay pan and are getting their sort of nutrients and water from that clay pan. So the flavors are getting better and better every year as we make the wines. I think the purpose of the presentation today was to just very quickly kind of run through the differences between, or differences and similarities between organic farming, biodynamic farming, and natural winemaking. And I guess natural winemaking can be a little bit scary for people, because it's not officially regulated, and there's no body that certifies natural winemakers. Although I believe that France is in the process of bringing in a regulation around natural wines. But then also just to talk about our approach at Supernatural Wine Co., which is we're probably best described as minimal intervention. We're sort of trying to make our wines as naturally as possible, but on the other hand, we don't want to release faulty wines. And I know that, in the natural wine world, it's a real spectrum between those people that do zero intervention, and then people like us who do a little bit of intervention if required. So we try not to, but we will if we need to. So that's just a quick shot of our range of products. We're producing, I think, 4 different versions of Sauvignon Blanc now. Include two skin fermented Sauvignon Blancs, our main wine, the Supernatural, which we've got today. We do a bottle fermented sparkling wine, or a Pétillant Naturel, or a Pet Nat. That's the one on the far left. And then we have another brand, Pacific Potion, which is the one on the far right. And it's essentially it's a brand that I'd like to do something with properly in the future, but it's a brand that we've been using so far when we don't quite have the quality of grapes to produce wines under our Supernatural range. A couple of gratuitous shots of our vineyard. It's a very beautiful place to work. That's an autumnal shot. And as you can see, we're sort of, we've got about 100 meters, about 330 feet of elevation, and looking due north, which for us down here is facing the sun, and looking out over Hawke's Bay, which is in the Pacific Ocean. That's what I'm going to be doing later on this morning, putting on the nets.
The beautiful netting, which is, I'm sure, the easiest job of harvest, right?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I'm the grunt. We've got a man driving the tractor with a spinner, and I'm going to be tying off every net and pulling it off the spinner and tying it off as he goes around each row. It's about 2 days' work. We've got about 160 rows.
And that is necessary for the birds, then there's no other reason, correct?
That's right. So if you look at that shot that we're looking at now, the vines at the very top, that's our Pinot Gris. And we've actually switched to using over the row nets for that section of the vineyard, because that's where the bird strike is the worst. So once the sun comes up, I'll take a photo and send it to you, because it's actually rather pretty, because they literally go from the ground all the way over the nets, and then they get clipped underneath. And so we're really trying to keep the birds out of that to preserve the fruit. And Pinot Gris is, it's a slightly less resilient variety than Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc has quite thick skins, whereas the Pinot Gris slightly thinner skins. So it's more prone to both bird strike and also the fungal diseases like powdery mildew.
Gregory, is Pinot Gris a larger grape in general as well?
I know that they're about the same size, but and I guess so. Right now, we do not want any more rain as grape farmers. We just want hot and dry weather. So what happens when it rains at this time of year is that the rain goes into the soil, and then it goes straight up the roots into the grapes, and they makes them bigger. And as I say, with Pinot Gris, the skin is just a little bit thinner. So that pressure can cause splitting, and then that leads to rot.
All right. And you guys are also 100% dry farmed. Is that correct? Is that?
Yes, we have an irrigation system on our vineyard in case of emergency, but we have been, and that's, part of the sort of natural winemaking approach is to dry farm. And as I said, a lot of the sort of, the bigger commercial brands of Sauvignon Blanc coming out of Marlborough, they will be irrigating a lot. They'll be looking for very high yields from their soils, sometimes up to 40 tons per hectare. That's an extreme, but I mean, obviously, a lot of these guys are aiming for 20 to 30 tons per hectare. A hectare is 100 square meters. And we're sort of aiming for 8 to 10 tons per hectare. Wow. And we believe that if you dry farm, you're effectively stressing the plants, and so they're having to look for their nutrients elsewhere. So our journey from through organic, biodynamic, natural sort of started we started the company in 2009. We started farming organically in 2010. We started our certification process and organic certification process in 2012, and then became fully certified organic in 2015. And it was about that time that our winemaker Hayden Penny joined us, and he took over management of the vineyard, and he took us further down the biodynamic approach in the vineyard. So and since 2012, we have not irrigated. Correct.
Well, that's great.
Right. My eyes are not good enough. Sorry. Change the. Yeah. So I just put together 3 really simple slides, and I guess I could just talk, very briefly that try to just explain, and I guess it's really our progression as much as anything as well. So we have organic, biodynamic, and then natural. So or both organic and biodynamic, there are certifications available, and we are certified organic with a company called BioGrow New Zealand Limited here in New Zealand. That's an international body. And it's for us, it's kind of like it's the basic first step to being able to produce natural wines. And I think most of the natural wine fairs, such as raw wines being the most famous, require you to be at least organic or biodynamically certified before you can present your wines at their fairs. So it's organic inputs only, but I mean, you can still spray and use organic pesticides and herbicides and so on. So you can still have a very, very tidy, neat looking vineyard with no crops or weeds or anything underneath your vines and so on. I guess for us with our approach, that's it's great, but we also are wanting to move to a more biodynamic approach, which is the next slide. Yeah, and so we're not certified biodynamic, but there are a couple of wineries in New Zealand that are, and most people use the Demeter certification. It's a 7-year process to get there, but to be certified with Demeter, you need to be farming your vineyard using the following the biodynamic principles, but also making the wine following biodynamic principles. And we are still quite small at the moment, so we're using contract facilities to make our wine. We make them organically, and that's certified, but we don't quite have the wherewithal to go fully down the biodynamic certification route yet. But it's certainly something that we're thinking about going forward. But essentially, biodynamic farming is trying to create a really healthy biosphere in the vineyard, and through that, promoting vine immunity and healthy soil. So our focus is very much about having really healthy soil and allowing the vines to prosper in that environment and build natural immunity. So I think I've said on that slide that it's a bit like looking after your own immune system. If you're eating the right foods and promoting gut health and so on, then you're going to be pretty healthy. And it's kind of the same with the approach to the vines. So just to give you a quick example, we ended up with a disease called Eutypa in our vineyard. It's a very slow-moving trunk disease, and it doesn't stop the vines producing, but it sort of slowly eats away at the vines and just reduces the yields from them. So we've had a program over the last 6 years of going through and actually just cutting that out. It basically comes in through the cane and it goes down the trunk, so you can see it. You cut it, and then you keep going until you can see that you've cut it away. And then that combined with, and then you have to retrain those vines in the year that you've done that, and let them give them a year to bounce back. And we've literally just finished the whole vineyard late last year, and we're just retraining that last block in our vineyard. But combined with our approach to soil management, which is like I say, trying to promote very healthy living soil, we've managed to eradicate the disease, and in the blocks that we've done, our yields are significantly increased, and we're getting much healthier fruit. And I say without irrigation, so it's all natural yield. What was I going to say? Moving on, yeah. So the biodynamic treatment. There's a few things. There's some things that can look a little bit crazy to people. There's a certain way of treating water and turning it before you make your preparations to put on the vineyard. We do things such as under vine cultivation, rather than using herbicides or pesticides to control weeds. So we literally just go through with that little machine that moves around the bottom of the vines and just turns the soil. But actually, we want the weeds and other plants that we plant between the rows to go back into the soil. We've done quite a lot of what we call companion planting, where we're planting wildflowers, mustard seeds, sunflowers and things like that, clover, between the vines, and we let that grow during our spring. So spring for us is September, October, November type of time. And then when we come into the ripening season, we then turn that back into the soil, and that provides our sort of nitrogen boost. There's another disease in New Zealand that's very prevalent, and it's called leaf roll virus. And it's spread by these little things called mealybugs. And almost every vineyard has mealybugs in them, and so they spread this virus, and it can be pretty debilitating. So we, for example, with our approach, we have mealybugs in the vineyard, but we don't have a problem with leaf roll virus. And the reason for that is because we have a food source for mealybugs at ground level. It's only when they don't have a food source at ground level that they start moving up the vines and spreading this virus. And that's because we're sort of wanting to create this sort of healthy biosphere where things are all sort of working in balance.
Gregory, on the first, you had mentioned one previous virus that you guys are dealing with. What was that one?
That's called Eutypa, which is a trunk disease.
I had not heard of that. Okay. So you guys are not quite at biodynamic, but you're working towards it. And are you doing any of the cow horn preparations?
Sorry. Yes, so actually there's so we actually buy them pre-prepared. There's a company with an entity in New Zealand called the Biodynamic Farming Association. So they have a farm where they actually make the preparations, and we buy them from them. Yeah, and then Hayden will essentially apply those at the right time of year in the vineyard. Now, I'm definitely not the expert. We have been following as many biodynamic principles as we can over the last few years. And a lot of it is, I've said there, follow the moon. So there are certain times, according to the Steiner, Rudolf Steiner principles about when you do certain things. And a lot of it is related to the cycles of the moon.
Absolutely. All right, go on to the next slide for you.
Yeah, I did actually, that last point on that previous slide, I did say it can be, biodynamic farming can be a little bit controversial for people who are choosing to eat a vegan lifestyle. I mean, obviously there are no animal products in our wines, but we are using animal products in the vineyard, and that does create, it can be a little bit tricky for, as I say, for vegans sometimes.
It's an interesting fact. I actually never thought of the connection between those two things, but you'd think that people that are thoughtful enough to live a life of being vegan would definitely also want to live a life very close to the natural way of preparations, and including biodynamic, but you can't do it because of the challenges there. Yeah,
I mean, so we're certainly not, killing cows in order to make the cow preparation. I think they've all died of natural causes, and yeah.
Very interesting. Never put those two together.
Yeah. Yeah, and then a natural, as I said at the beginning, there's no real certification about for natural wines, but I guess there is a kind of a set of principles that are developing through the community. So it's a lot of it is around obviously as little intervention as possible, and I suppose the key things are they would ideally like that your grapes are hand picked. They want minimal use of machinery in the vineyard, and I think the reason for that is that the belief is that using machinery is compacts the soil to an extent that it doesn't it can't be as healthy as it otherwise would be. Then there's it's using wild yeasts rather than manufactured packet yeasts. It is allowing the wines to go through malolactic fermentation as well as alcoholic fermentation. So you're not preventing the malolactic fermentation. And it's trying to keep either using no sulfur as a preservative or using very low levels of sulfur. And I think the generally accepted measure now is around 70 parts per million sulfur. And just to put that into context, the limit for sulfur in New Zealand for conventional wineries is 300 parts per million, and the limit for organic wines is 150 parts per million. And certainly when it comes to our wines, we're trying to get ourselves at 60 or below for our wines, but sometimes things happen and you need a little bit of extra sulfur just to make sure that the wine is doesn't spoil. So I think the next slide, I've just sort of tried to set out our approach. And I'm sorry, my computer hasn't turned on yet, and so it's quite hard for me to, I'm just gonna, there we go. Yeah, so, and I guess what I'm trying to say about our wines is, okay, so we're certified organic, we're following biodynamic principles in the vineyard, we're trying to make our wines as naturally as possible. But by the same token, we don't want to release faulty wines. So our approach, I guess, is best summarized as minimal intervention. So we only intervene if we think we need to. So, and again, I've just said there about old vines. I said earlier that some of the commercial growers, they might have a vineyard for 14 or 15 years, and they'd be, spraying it with pesticides and herbicides, and the soil dies. And therefore the vines reach the end of their life. So they whip out the vines, prep the soil again and replant. We're the opposite. We want old vines. We want our vines. And, in the, European context, our vines are still very, very young. Our vines are 15, 16 years old, but we want to keep them going. We want to, keep developing the complexity from having older vines. We're dry farming, as we discussed earlier. And we can dry farm, even though we don't get a lot of rain here in Hawke's Bay. It's the second lowest rainfall in the country, I think. And as I said, it's minimal intervention, but we will intervene if we have to. So as I say, our approach is to make them as naturally as possible and to not release faulty wines. And because of our approach in the vineyard, we've been able to do that more and more successfully as we've developed over the last few years. Just a couple of things. Yeah, all of our wines are made with wild yeast, and what that means, and the way we start our fermentation for each of our wines is that we a couple of weeks before harvest, we pick basically a big bin of grapes, we stomp it with our feet, and we stick it into the vineyard. And because we've got all these companion plants around and other plantings through the vineyard, we have a lot of yeast floating through the air, basically. And then that little set of grapes will start fermenting spontaneously. So it's effectively a spontaneous fermentation process, and that's called a pied de cuve formula. And then once we're ready to press the grapes and start making the wine, we transfer that formula to the winery. To start our fermentation in the winery. Sorry, Nick, I saw your question come up, but I couldn't see all of it.
Greg, were you asking me that question?
Yeah, Nick, I think I saw a question come up, but I could only see half of it for some reason on my phone.
Just wondering how the wines will continue to develop as the vines get older.
Well, I think we just get. So I suppose the other thing about our wines is that we have a bunch of different wines that we make, and we follow essentially the same recipe, as it were, to make each of those wines each year. But also we want our wines to reflect the vintage that they were made in. And so sometimes you might have a super hot vintage, and sometimes you might have a cooler vintage, and you might end up with, slightly sweeter fruit or slightly more acidic fruit. And so we want each of our wines to reflect that. So, for example, the Supernatural, which I think we're coming on to, no two vintages of the Supernatural will taste the same. We do, and I think we are getting more and more complexity from the vines each year. But of course, it's a risky game when you're putting yourself at the mercy of Mother Nature every year.
And you're doing it in so many ways, putting yourself at risk of Mother Nature. Not only in the vineyard, not only in the winery, but then in the bottle with the low sulfites and all this natural. I mean, it's definitely not a low lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's pretty stressful about this time of year for a couple of months. I've said there no fining. So fining is the clarification process. A lot of people are using animal proteins or eggshells or whatever. That's sort of clean up any bits floating around. We don't do that. We rack our wines instead. So we take off the top layer of solids from the tank, but then we try to bottle all of our wines without any sort of chemical fining, and without ideally without filtering the wines as well.
All right, should we go ahead and open up our first wine here? We'll go ahead with the Supernatural.
Yeah, I'll just let everybody
have our
have a taste.
2-ounce bottle here. So go ahead and open that guy if you haven't already. Gregory, that doesn't look like the typical wine glass.
White wine bottle? No, that's right. Yeah, no, I suppose when we set up our brand, we're back in 2009, we knew we wanted to make different wines and that we had a pretty different vineyard. And I think when it came to our approach to packaging, we were, at that time, I think it was still pretty conservative. Everybody was putting certain wines in certain bottles and bottle shapes and so on. New Zealand was kind of in the middle of that process of moving away from cork to crown seal, to screw cap. And of course, we were thinking, well, what can we do that's a little bit different that's going to make our wine stand out on the shelf? And we actually took a lot more inspiration from beer branding than we did from wine branding. That's kind of one of the reasons we came up with our approach in using the crown seal for our wines. It's actually now pretty common, I guess, in the natural winemaking world around the world. Although I think we were the first people to put still wine under a crown seal in New Zealand. So yeah, and it looks cool. So this is our main wine, the Supernatural. We pick our Sauvignon Blanc in about 3 broad groups, depending on the fruit that we want for the different wines. So we pick our grapes for our bubbles, for our pet nat first, because we want slightly less ripe fruit so that we get that kind of, more sort of fruit forward character. Supernatural is our second pick, about a week later. And then about a week after that, we pick hand pick our grapes for our skin fermented Sauvignon Blancs. So this wine, because it's our largest production, we do actually use a machine to harvest the grapes for this. Everything else we hand pick, but it would take us, 10 days or something if we were going to hand pick the grapes for this wine. And the machine that we use is actually it's a beautiful French machine called a Blanc harvester. It's over the row. It effectively gently shakes the grapes off the vine, and it uses an optical sorter to effectively just choose the best fruit. So using this machine takes about a half a day to harvest what we need for this wine, and it gives us hand-picked quality. So it's actually and it come back to that sort of. So technically, it probably doesn't meet the definition of a natural wine in that sense, but we're very happy with the quality of the grapes that we get from using this machine. As I said, we start the fermentation with that wild yeast formula that I talked about, the Pied de Cuve. sorry, the PA2Q formula. We pick the grapes, we take it to the winery, we let the grapes sit, basically just sit on a huge tray for about 6 hours before we press them. And what that does, it just allows a little bit of the phenolic characters from the skins to soak into the grapes. So you get a slight hint of, phenolics, tannins when you're tasting this wine. And then we let it rest on its lees, on the dead yeast cells, with a lot of stirring for 12 months. And with that, we're trying to build, texture, creaminess, butteriness almost, mouthfeel. And this particular wine, the 2018, went through full malolactic fermentation, which is that sort of secondary fermentation, the fermentation that burns off the lactic acid, and that sort of gives it an extra layer of creaminess and subtlety. Alcohol, that's 13.6, and like I say, that varies. So we've been down as low as 11.5% with some of our previous vintages, and we've been as high as 14.5%, just depending on the vintage. But we don't try to control that. We just deliver what the vintage delivers. And because this went through malolactic fermentation, we could get away with really, really low levels of sulfur. So I think I talked about the limit in New Zealand being 300 parts per million. This is 30 at bottling, and it would be negligible now. And it's unfined and unfiltered.
2020, Gregory.
Oh, you're on the 2020. I do apologize.
Good. Good.
Well, I think the 2020 is actually going to end up being pretty similar to the 2018. So
the complexity and weight of this Sauvignon Blanc always just makes me so happy. It's got just so much more, showing in it and expressive that makes me just happy at the way and style that you guys are making wines that results in quality and a difference that is in the glass.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and I suppose the first point is that, Hawke's Bay Sauvignon Blanc is actually quite different from Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. It's definitely known for its sort of warmer, more tropical expression of the grape, whereas Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc has got that very classic, very fruit forward, gooseberry-ish, green pepper, and in my opinion, slightly acidic. Whereas the Hawke's Bay fruit tends to be warmer and rounder. And I think what we've done is we've added an extra layer to the winemaking process. So rather than trying to churn it out in 3 months, we're actually giving it a lot more time to develop characters. And also, I think our vineyard, as I mentioned, is quite different from your classic Hawke's Bay vineyard, and we've got that sort of lime-rich soil. So you get quite a lot of those citrusy flavors coming through. And also, a lot of our wines, all of our wines actually have a spicy element of some type, depending on the wine that we're making. And I think with this one, you get that kind of soft jalapeno spice coming through.
The acid is definitely elevated, I think, but the intensity and the weight of the wine and the fruitiness, I mean, it's not out of balance at all, which I think is spectacular as well.
Yeah.
If there are any questions that anyone has for Gregory, please go ahead and add those in the chat. But as of now, I think we are all good. And let's go ahead and unless there's anything else you wanted to add on the supernatural, we'll move to the either the minus 220 or the green glow. I believe we had the green glow next. Does that work, Gregory?
Sounds good to me. Yep.
All right, so we'll go move on to the green glow.
So actually, I will talk just a little bit about both green glow and minus 220 at the beginning. These are both skin fermented Sauvignon Blancs. Green glow has a little bit of sulfur added at bottling and is fermented in stainless steel. minus 220 is fermented in old oak barrels and has no sulfur added at bottling. But actually, we pick the grapes for both these wines together, and they ferment. They go through alcoholic fermentation together, and then we separate them into the different vessels and then pursue the different treatment. So I actually think having them side by side is really interesting, actually, because you can see that even though they're picked at the same time and have gone through the alcoholic fermentation together, they end up being quite different beasts because of the different treatment. And it's for me, it's really fun to see how they, you know, how the treatment can actually shape the wine. And so, just, I mean, very simply, this is you know, skin fermented white wine, or what's colloquially known as an orange wine. Our view, so have tasted, fortunately, before pre-COVID, when we were allowed to travel, I've been done extensive traveling around certain parts of the world, including Friuli in northeastern Italy and western Slovenia, where this style of wine, I guess, really sort of started coming back maybe 10, 15 years ago. And that was those wines that we tasted that were kind of the inspiration for what we wanted to do. But some of those guys are pretty crazy. They'll do, you know, something like 7 months of skin fermentation, then a couple of years of aging in barrels. I think we sort of worked out that for us, we wanted to do a slightly shorter skin fermentation. And when we started, we started around 2 to 3 weeks. That was back in 2013. But we worked out that actually having a little bit less skin fermentation sort of reduced the tannic and the sort of slightly bitter qualities of the fermentation process. And so we roughly ending up between 7 and 10 days now with our skin fermented wines. So as you can see there, Green Glow, that had 9 days on skins. It takes us 6 months to make. So we start with that wild yeast formula. It goes into stainless steel. Again, lots of stirring, lots of lees contact, the dead yeast cells, so you're getting that texture. It goes through full malolactic fermentation, and then we bottle it unfined and unfiltered, and we just add a tiny bit of sulfur at that bottling time, and it's very small production. So yeah, you can see the total sulfur there, 55. The free sulfur, 31. That's the added sulfur, and that's the stuff that binds and reduces. So right now, the total sulfur in that bottle would probably be, I don't know, less than 30.
And just speaking comparatively, I think that most California, or I shouldn't just narrow out California, most natural, or that's the wrong word as well, most wineries producing wine usually add anywhere from 30 to 50 parts per million just at the pump, right on top of the grapes when they first come in, and that's what you're adding basically all together.
Correct.
So significantly different and really low.
Yeah, and I think that you get some really interesting flavors in that wine with that, with the work we've done, a little bit of skin contact. It's definitely got that sort of kind of grapefruit pith, astringency. It sounds like a terrible word, but yeah, and then that sort of hints of sort of warm, spicy kind of cut grass type element.
Absolutely nailed it with the grapefruit pith for sure.
Yeah, and that's these for us, our skin fermented wines are definitely more food oriented wines. We recommend not serving them too chilled. We like to serve them at cellar temperature, which in Celsius is about 14 to 16 degrees. I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit, sorry.
Add 15 and double.
Right, yeah, there we go. Yeah, and I think they they really suit food, and with this particular wine, I think that it goes really well with seafood, particularly with shellfish. I always, if I can get my hands on some fresh oysters, this wine with some fresh oysters is pretty stunning.
I will have to try that tonight.
There we go.
So are there any questions for Gregory on the green glow? I think that the one question that I get constantly on this is where the name comes from. And also the fun fact about this wine and the effect light has on it, or the lack thereof, on the label. That's
right. That label glows in the dark. It does need light on it in order to glow in the dark. But if you're putting it into a bar fridge that has a light, you'll be it's pretty spectacular when you take it out of the fridge. Yeah. So this so we developed our initial 2 skin fermented wines, Green Glow and Spook Light, in 2013. And Spook Light is our skin fermented Pinot Gris, and so they're effectively sister wines. And obviously we already started using the name Supernatural as our main name and our sort of company name. And we wanted to keep that supernatural theme going. So Green Glow is green for Sauvignon Blanc, glow for the extra glow that you get from skin fermentation. So you can see it's a much deeper yellow than the Supernatural color wise. And then everything around the outside of the label there, that's deep sea anemone, so things that actually do glow green at the bottom of the sea. And then Spook Light, which is it's actually orange in color, our skin fermented Pinot Gris, which I think is back on that initial slide at the beginning. It comes out a beautiful coppery color. Yeah, so that's Spook Light there in the middle, or almost the middle. And Spook Light is actually an unexplained orange light phenomenon in the Ozarks. Apparently, there's a road there that people have been seeing this orange light. You drive down, I see this orange glow, and there's all various theories about what it is and whether it's some, ghosts of ancient war veterans or whatever. But that's where the name Spook Light comes from, and it reflects supernaturally an orange wine.
All right, fantastic. We'll go ahead and skip to the next wine here, the minus 220.
Yeah, so minus 220, we've you can see that the label is very similar to Green Glow. It's essentially the same shape. And this wine we started making in 2016, and actually it was, in fact, it was Hayden, our winemaker Hayden's idea. He wanted to. New Zealand was just embarking on its first natural wine fair, which is a show called Bud Burst that happens every couple of years. So there's been 3 so far, 2016, 2018, and 2020. And when they launched in 2016, they were pretty organized, and they asked all of the people that were going to be showing their wines if they could produce what they call a gold standard natural wine. So we literally only made 1 barrel of this in 2016 as an experiment for that show. And we, as I say, we took, some of our Green Glow from that year and put it into an old barrel, which is 225 liters and ends up being about 300 bottles. And then effectively left it there. So we let it go through malolactic fermentation on its lees in the barrel. But if it's in a barrel, obviously you can't do the stirring because you can't get in. So it was just sat there for 6 months and went through its thing. And then we bottled it without fining it, without filtering it. And it was a roaring success. And so we ended up selling pretty much that whole first barrel to our New Zealand distributor, who took it on. From then, we've just been upping the production every year since then. So it's incredible. It's a totally handmade wine. It's got 0 intervention. So you see there that the total sulfur ends up being 2.5 for this particular wine. But that's just the sulfur that's created as a byproduct of fermentation. So there's 0 added sulfur. And then we put it under a natural cork. Hayden really wanted to use, all natural packaging if possible. And then we top it off with unparaffined beeswax from our local honey factory, Arataki. Well, you guys haven't got that bottle, unfortunately, but when you get a bottle in front of you, you can actually smell the beeswax on the seal. So the cork goes in on the production line with a machine, but then we hand wax every bottle, and we're sort of producing about 2,400 bottles a year at the moment. So super small production. So eight barrels. But I think it's really interesting how different it ends up being from Green Glow when you think they're both essentially skin fermented Sauvignon Blancs, but I think this one is quite soft, a bit softer, creamier. It's sort of more lemony and citrusy, less of that sort of spiciness. It's more soft ginger spiciness rather than that sort of quite, quite spicy character of the Green Glow.
Now on the sheet, it says that the wine is fermented on its skin for 9 days, and that's done inside the old oak barrels?
No, so Green Glow and -220 go through alcoholic fermentation together in stainless steel and the 9 days on skins. And then we separate the -220 portion and let it go through lees work and malolactic fermentation in the old wooden barrels.
And then how long does it stay in those barrels? It says
6 months
right there. Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. I just love the balance and the rounding of the acidities, the acid on there. That little bit of oak does, and it's a little bit more on the oxidation side. And with such low sulfur, having oxidation or having that micro-oxidation as a result of old barrels just would scare the living crap out of me. I mean, low sulfite wine in a used barrel, number one. Number two, malolactic fermentation in oak, and then having that sit there for 6 months.
That's right. You're giving away control essentially when you make this wine.
Very impressive. I need to know your yoga instructor, because you have skills of nerves. Nerves of steel, I should say, not the other way around. But fine.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Any questions on the last wine here? Fantastic. And then got the next slide here.
Oh, that's just a bit of shameless plugging. So this is from Decanter magazine late last year, I think, where we, if you can see there on the right-hand side, Green Glow came in at number 9 of the top 30 orange wines for an article that Simon Wolf wrote for Decanter magazine. Simon's actually a reasonably good friend now. He's based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and I was lucky enough to live there for a few months and hung out with him a lot. He showed me around all his favorite sour beer places in Amsterdam, and then I took him some wines, and he wrote it up. And when he published this article, he went sort of went back through his back catalogue to find his highest scoring wines, and Green Glow ended up in there, which is pretty cool, especially because Decanter can be, I guess, perceived as a reasonably conservative wine magazine.
Absolutely. Great accomplishment. We do have a quick question from Mr. Young on how quickly would you say these wines should be consumed from release?
So we think that the Supernatural has Supernatural, which is the first wine we tasted. We think it has at least 5 years aging potential, and if not longer. We think our skin fermented wines, Green Glow and Spooklight, actually benefit from bottle age, and we haven't been making them long enough yet, but we're sort of we're thinking that they're at least 10 years aging potential. -220, of course, is a different beast because it doesn't have any added sulfur. So That's probably one that we would recommend consuming, within a year to two of production. We do have some of the 2016 in the cellar, and we whip one out every so often just to taste it. And the last time I tasted it, it was still in pretty good shape.
Very cool. Thanks for that question, John. Hopefully that answer is enough for you. I know we've got a little bit in the Glunz cellar. Looking forward to tasting that a couple years of age. Fantastic. Any other questions at this point? Gregory, was there anything else, or should we open it up for Q&A?
I think I've done enough talking.
Well, I'm glad to see there's actually sun coming in the windows behind you.
Yeah.
Day has broken in New Zealand. And so at this point, if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to unmute and ask those questions. Before we get too deep into questions, I do want to let everybody know that we will, fantastic shot. And that is the Pinot Gris vineyard?
That's the vine. Yes, the vines at the top of the Pinot Gris, and then what you can see beyond that is our Sauvignon Blanc. I'll just see if I can get it slightly higher so you can. Yeah, like I say, we just have that little bit of elevation.
Very nice. And we've already got some of the netting out already.
Yeah, that's the Pinot Gris. We use over the road nets on the Pinot Gris, and that's
Not a bad view out your house window.
It's a pretty good place to work.
So before we break into too deep into the questions Q&A, I did want to let everybody know that I will be following up with everyone that RSVP'd via email. We'll be sending out the presentation that we just viewed with Gregory, along with some of our special sale prices, along with the full calendar of the remaining 6 presentations we'll be doing. But at this point, if anybody wants to just go ahead and unmute, please feel free to throw some questions at us. One of the questions I had for you was actually more of a statement, Gregory, was the connection that you made, pardon my phone there, was the connection you made between soil health and old vines. I never really thought of it. I've always been a huge old vine wine fan, but the fact that you can't have vines grow old, without that attention to detail in the soil. And it really shows off even more of a reason, not just the spectacular quality that comes off of them, but the fact that soil health has got to be there as a starting point.
Exactly, and we're super excited to see what actually happens over the next few years with our wines.
Fantastic. All right. Any other questions we have in here? You could. If you don't want to add, we've got reviewer says minus 2020 is from a single plot, but you'd said it was picked and fermented with Green Glow. Are both from the same plot?
Yeah, so what I just showed you, that our Sauvignon Blanc vineyard, it kind of runs, it's a kind of a triangular shape. And the clay pan that we have, it actually varies in depth from anywhere between 3 meters and 10 meters on our vineyard. And in the very northeastern corner of the vineyard, the clay pan is at its shallowest, so around 3 meters. So that's actually where we pick the grapes, hand-pick the grapes for both Green Glow and minus 220. So we essentially leave that as our last pick, and we do some crop estimates, and we leave the rows down there for roughly the volume that we're targeting, which is around 5 or 6 tons. And then we just work back from that northeastern corner until we've hand-picked that. And that's our last pick because we want the fruit to be quite ripe to make those wines.
Fantastic. Any other questions out there?
But yes, to answer the actual question, they are from The same plot, yeah. And like I say, they go through alcoholic fermentation together in the same tank before we separate them out into the two batches.
Anything new and up and coming that we are looking forward to seeing from the Supernatural Wine Company?
Well, if COVID hadn't come along and kiboshed a few plans, we were hoping to look at being able to buy in some parcels of grapes this year, but I think that's going to have to wait until next year. We did make a red in 2019 using some bought grapes from Paratua, Cabernet Franc, and that's definitely an experiment that we want to keep going once things get back a bit back to normal a bit better.
We're all looking forward to that, aren't we?
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, at this point, if no one else has any questions, we're going to go ahead and continue on here, but we'll stick around if anybody has any further questions. But at this point, Gregory, I can't thank you enough for waking up as early as you did before the sun and joining us here in Chicago with these fabulous wines. We are excited at the new releases and can't wait to continue to grow those here in the Midwest.
Brilliant. I can't wait to get out there and help you do that.
Absolutely.